Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Rising Laterally podcast. This is Arjun Sachdev.
And this is Jay Ballou. We hope you find something here that offers you new meaning or a fresh perspective.
If you do, we encourage you to give it life.
Be bold.
Experiment.
And most importantly, bring it into the interactions with the people you surround yourself with.
And see what happens. Thanks for checking out this week's podcast. It's an exciting episode for two reasons. First is because we are going to chat today with Matt Frazier and Robert Cheeke, authors of the new book called The Plant-Based Athlete. It's published by HarperCollins. It was released on June 15th. So this book is about as fresh as the produce at the farmer's market.
Good one.
How cool is it that Matt Frazier is an ultra marathon runner? He's run a couple of 50-mile races. I know he's planning another 100-mile race, and he is the man behind the popular website called No Meat Athlete. He also has cookbooks and guides under that same name. Matt, I'm sure it's been quite a journey for you, and I know Jay and I really want to learn about what got you started and inspired. We'll talk about that in a moment. Cool. And Robert Cheeke, the man often referred to as the godfather of vegan bodybuilding, which is something I'm pretty sure you have to earn. He's a two-time natural bodybuilding champion. He's also the founder of veganbodybuilding.com. He's the author of 3 other books, and he's been plant-based for 25 years. And he's been sharing this story all over the world. So gentlemen, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited.
The pleasure is actually all ours. And a second reason this is really exciting is because this is our 50th episode. So high fives all around for that. And
milestone.
Yeah, it's a huge milestone. And, we're knocking on the door of 2 weeks away from 52 consecutive episodes, which is a full year. So literally, it's just a different way about thinking of time. Some people are measuring it in days, months, years, maybe the age of their child. And I feel like I've just been measuring time with a number of podcast episodes. But
I like the consistency. It's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so that consistency is something I think is something we want to talk about, because having the opportunity to talk about a book on diet and fitness and it being our 50th episode kind of makes all the sense in the universe, just because of that dedication and commitment that's required, the overlap in having a goal, making a plan, and seeing outcomes, the overlap in just the roller coaster ride that it can be for people, especially at first. I think both of you understand that, the hurdles, the gains, the losses, the good days, the bad days, and how all of this is really just one huge learning process. And so again, it just feels pretty special that on our 50th episode, we're talking about diet and fitness, and it just kind of feels out of ordinary.
Very cool. Yeah, we happen to have just been on Rich Roll's podcast earlier this week. The episode came out. When we were out there, I think he's on we were like episode 604 or something.
Wow.
And he
nice.
told me he has not missed a single week. He's published an episode every single week since the podcast started. And
Wow.
I was like, that's how you do it. I mean, he's amazing, but you don't have to be amazing. You just be you, and you show up, and people will notice. The people who like you will find you. And it's amazing what that does.
And that's how he got started too, right? He just started doing some small podcasts, some small interviews here and there, and it just spiraled from that. It just kept going and going and going. And someone else just interviewed us. Remember that they said it was his 493rd episode. It just takes that, and you just keep on going.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's humbling in two ways. First of all, to get to 50, but then to realize people are just, so far ahead in the game. So there's something to strive for.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's funny you mentioned Rich Roll, because you started your book actually by talking about him. And so I was actually curious to know, what made you talk about him first? And maybe that's something we can talk about in a minute. But let me just rewind a little bit, because we actually thought this was going to be a great topic, because it's not that veganism is new. It's that the science behind it is more compelling than ever. And sometimes it just takes the right people to put a sentence together with the right words at the right time. And you just never know when it's going to click for somebody. So I want to put some fundamentals on the table, such as that you can get all of your protein from plants. Plant foods have 64 times more antioxidants than animal foods. Fiber is only found in plant foods. Dietary cholesterol is only found in animal foods. and plants have a far superior nutritional density per calorie than animal foods. And so I know when you wrote the book, you intended for it to be about teaching people how they can adapt these plant-based strategies. And then you wanted to share, stories of famous people, how, they're, these exceptional athletes, they eat, train, and recover. But let's just take a step back and learn a little bit more about you both. Let's start with where you grew up, what life was like at that time, and a few of the pit stops along the way that led you to this magical moment, our 50th episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I can go first because I started first back in 1995. I was growing up on a farm, born in 1980, a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, and a farm kid, and raising animals and even selling them at the auction. Animals that had first names, calves like Tim and Betsy. They were from my calves, and to sell them at the auction where they were going to be turned into somebody's food. And that's where I first connected with this issue of compassion and contributing to animal cruelty. I was already an athlete. I was, 15 years old. I was a 5-sport athlete. I was eating chicken and bacon and all of these foods on a regular basis, including with friends I'm still very, very good friends with today, all these years later. But I decided, you know what? I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to contribute to animal suffering. I lived right next to a dairy farm. And some people don't know this, like, when cows die, they pile them up and it's just, they're there and until they're hauled away. And, having those kinds of experiences really enriched this idea of compassion in me. And so my older sister really was the one who inspired me. She was the catalyst organizing this Animal Rights Week at our high school. I went just out of respect for her. That's all I was doing. I was there to be vegan for a week. And I went there. I listened to people talk about factory farming, about animal testing. I watched videos of animal cruelty. I read literature. And very importantly, I had conversations. I talked to people. I asked questions. I answered questions. And I became vegan then. And what started out as a week, the Animal Rights Week, has turned into something like 1,300 weeks. Talk about consistency.
Yeah.
Imagine if those were each episode of a podcast or something, 1,300. Take that, Rich Roll. So, I've been at it for a long time now, but I was a long distance runner. I was a soccer player. I was a basketball player. I was a wrestler at a very low body weight. I wanted to get bigger and stronger. I wanted to be like Captain Planet, especially I was all into that anyway, right? Recycling and being kind to the environment. I wanted to be like Captain Planet.
That's hilarious.
And so I started lifting weights, and it was laughable. I mean, come on, 120 pounds when I became vegan, a long distance runner, aspiring to someday be this pro wrestler type figure, getting bigger and stronger, where now, my shirt doesn't even fit right. Right. Yeah. So, but I went after it, I went after it. And I just did that one thing that unfortunately so many people don't do. And I just believed in myself. I said, I got 1,440 minutes every day. I'm going to make the most of this. And it may not be today. It may not be even a year from now, but someday I'm going to achieve these things. And so I did. I lifted weights. I went on to become a multi-time champion vegan bodybuilder. I put on 100 pounds, from 120 pounds to 220 pounds. And all the while, and it's relevant, ever since I was in the 3rd grade at 8 years old, I wanted to be a writer. My father has published 15 books. I wanted to do the same. Wow. And veganism and being a champion vegan bodybuilder gave me a platform. I wrote my first book, Vegan Bodybuilding Fitness, around 2008, 2009. It came out in 2010. I wrote another book. And then I connected with this man, a good friend for more than a decade, who created probably the largest plant-based athlete community in the world with nomeatathlete.com. We've toured together. We're on tour, speaking tours in front of large audiences together out in the Caribbean and in different cities. And I flew across the country and said, Matt, let's do this. Let's write about the compelling stories of the world's greatest plant-based athletes. Let's put them in a book and let's have this thing absolutely soar. And that's what's happened. And it's all from connecting the dots ahead of time. When I became vegan, I connected the dots of what I wanted to do with compassion. When I started working out, I connected the dots of what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And then I connected the dots with writing ever since I was a kid. I worked at it middle school, high school, college,
Right.
after college, a lot of failed projects, a lot of failed books, at least 5 books that never made it on shelves. I mean, completed 300-page books or 100-page books, never saw the light of day. No one's seen them but a few friends, a few editors. And all my books got rejected by publishers. I self-published all of them until I finally caught my break a decade later with HarperCollins, with an agent, and landed this one with Matt Frazier. So we're excited. And as I told you off the air, it's right now, as we're speaking, as we're talking to each other at the moment, it's the number 57 best-selling book in America on Amazon, the number 23 best-selling book in the country of Canada, which makes it one of the best-selling books in the world. And
Congratulations.
I thought about
That's
that.
awesome.
Thank you. And I thought about that 33 years ago, I could picture that. Some dreams take a while. Some goals take a while. They really do. But we're here and just feeling grateful.
Fantastic. Pinch yourself for a moment.
Pinch.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing. It's like, I tell myself all the time, it's like, people have been doing things for 25, 35, 45 years. And I've only been on the planet for 35 years. And so it's just remarkable about, just thinking about that in terms of a mindset where we're all in a frenzy. We want things yesterday, but we have pretty long lives and things take time. And that's a story that you just shared.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, can you tell us a little bit about your experience coming to embrace the plant-based diet and proselytize it like you have all over the world?
Sure. Yeah, I can. And actually, it'll tie into what you guys just said about having time. And if we sort of just accept that, like, some things take time and you got to be patient but be consistent, so you'll see where that shows up here. I started, I completely normal, average childhood, happy, good, nice middle-class family. But we had standard American diet, no real talk about nutrition, except once there was like a heart, high cholesterol scare. So we all stopped having hot dogs and whatever, which is like a lot of families. And it wasn't until college that I got into fitness beyond just like rec sports or some travel sports, nothing really serious ever. And then I for some reason I got into fitness, and I guess this is just my personality, but I got into it and right away, like, started thinking I'd like to do a marathon, because it just seems like impossible. Like I said, I just didn't come from that background where I knew a single person who had ever done a marathon. So it just seemed like an impossible feat for someone like me. Even though, whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of people do them every year, maybe millions. And so I with my friends, we decided we were going to qualify for the Boston Marathon. My other fitness friends in college, we had no business doing that. We had no business even running marathons. We were running 3 and 4 miles at a time for fitness, but nothing else. And so it ended up, we ran that marathon and we missed Boston by 103 minutes. We missed the qualifying time by that much. Instead of a 3:10, we ran a 4:53, which was humbling and surprisingly super inspiring, because I've never been so inspired by failure as that, because I'm failing by that much. I was like, you'd have to be a whole different class of person, not just class of athlete, class of person to be dedicated enough to be that kind of athlete, given my particular genetics. Like, some people can just go out and do that, but like, I was thinking, you, Matt Frazier, would have to be totally different to do that. And somehow that lit a fire, and I was like, wow, like, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to find a way to do that. So I knew that I could and somehow would, but I also many times thought this is, just not going to happen. I had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of injuries, all kinds of stuff. So 5 years into this journey, maybe it was 6 years into the journey, I had taken 90 minutes off my time. I was still 10 minutes shy. And once you've taken 90 minutes off of a marathon time, those last 10 minutes, they're not easy to get off. You've kind of done all the low hanging fruit is picked. And so I wasn't sure that I was going to get there, but I was still just sort of dedicated. And at the same time, I started wanting to be vegetarian for completely unrelated personal ethical reasons. I had a dog that I just loved and couldn't imagine eating, pigs that were just as smart and just as emotional feelings as these dogs, or as this dog. And so that just got me thinking, and I said, I just don't want to do this anymore. So gradually I started transitioning to a vegetarian diet, and I didn't at all think it would help me with running, by no means. But I thought, I don't want it to hurt my running, and I want to find a way to make this work. So I started looking around on the internet, and this was 2009, and I couldn't find anything that was helpful for endurance runners to give you any confidence that this worked. There were people who were doing it then, but it just wasn't publicized. No one knew it. And so the websites I found weren't helpful. They were too preachy and pushy, and I couldn't trust that they were grounded in any kind of science, or it just seemed like they were just the person's agenda. And that's what a lot of what the internet is. People just kind of say things. So I said, this is not helpful at all. I'm going to still try this, and I'm going to start writing about what I'm doing. And this was the age of blogging. So I went to WordPress and just thought of this name, No Meat Athlete, and started writing about what I was doing. And then the big surprise was that 6 months later, I took those final 10 minutes off my time and qualified for Boston by 1 minute. Yeah, it was great. And my training that summer was incredible. I never even came close to an injury. Harder, longer, faster workouts than I'd ever done before. And the injury never came. Like with running, when you're training really well, that hard, when you're pushing it, the story of my running career up to that point was you'll get injured as soon as things start going well, because you'll end up overtraining. This time I didn't get injured, not at all. And I went out and ran this fastest race of my life, qualified for Boston. And then from there, just didn't look back. I realized that then I started to learn that people were doing this for performance reasons, choosing not just vegetarian, but vegan diets. I met people like Robert, who inspired me to go all the way vegan, several elite athlete ultra runners who were doing that. And then I got into ultra running, ran several 50 milers, ran a 100-miler completely vegan. And, and then spent a few years growing this website, this community, kind of spreading this message, trying to spread the message in the same way that I always did, which was like, I did not want to be that pushy, completely unscientific, making false claims about this diet. I did not want to be that person. I just wanted to be this kind of cool, chilled out, like, I'm going to ground my stuff in science, and I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, and I'm going to give you the best example I can, but I'm not going to tell you that this is right for you, or you should do this, or you're wrong for not doing this. I just made it cool and welcoming. And that's what No Meat Athlete communities really, really embraced, that vibe and that way of spreading this message. So that's what I would say I'm most proud of, the way that we spread this message. And then Robert kind of took it from there. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. And so the part about the consistency thing, what I realized is that when I qualified for Boston 7 years after I started, a lot of times looking back, like, I can see all the different steps that mattered. The diet mattered, the running, learning how to run without getting hurt, then learning how to actually structure a workout program that'll force you to make adaptations and get faster. Learned all those things, and all those things mattered. But perhaps what mattered more than any one of them was when I'd been running for 7 years versus running for 1 year, my body was just entirely different. Like things that I could not explain at all. Your brain learns how to run. Your brain learns how to more efficiently recruit muscle fibers. And that only comes with time and showing up and doing it. So like all the keys to running faster, the one that matters is actually show up and run every single day, or every 5 times a week, or whatever it is. And don't take 6 months off or 3 months off. And the reason it took me 7 years, I probably could have done it in 3 or 4 years if I had known this, that like the important thing is going to be get out there and train. You're not going to qualify in your next race when you missed it by 100 minutes. But like independent of fitness level, you're just a faster runner when you've been running for a while. And that's what it was. It just took showing up and doing it, and then making sure to putting all the pieces in place, of which the plant-based diet was the final one. But perhaps more than that, it was just the consistency of doing it.
That's awesome. And it's one of those things now where you can always reflect. If you're ever faced with a challenge, you can always think about what it took for you and that 7-year journey. And I'm pretty sure that's just like a mental hack for you now, where you can just go through anything if you want.
Completely. That and the 100-miler too, like that taught me, marathoning taught me to be in really good shape and work hard and all that. 100-miler taught me how to not quit things, because to do ultra running, I was in no better shape when I ran 100 than when I ran 26 miles for marathons. I just was mentally better at not quitting. I just knew that when I thought I was done, you have 80% more still that you can go. I mean, it's amazing that you can tap into that. So the great thing that running has brought to me was it was my means of doing things that to me were impossible when I first heard them. When I first heard people running 100 miles, I literally thought it was a typo. I thought there's no way that's actually true, that it must have meant 10 on whatever I was reading. And so, yeah, I think that's a cool thing about running, though. Like, you don't have to be genetically gifted to do it. The longer the distance, the more it becomes just about how much training you've put in. It's not really about genetics. Certainly at the very highest levels, perhaps it helps. But like totally regular people who are not athletic can do things that most people would say that's impossible for me. But pretty much everyone can do that if they just want to work at it. And I think it's really neat to have a vehicle like that we're like, you can teach yourself that you can do impossible things. And what better lesson than that?
Exactly. And we've just had the pleasure recently of having a conversation with Dean Karnassus, who is
nice.
Right. Yeah. So you may have heard of him, but he's known as the ultra marathon man. And, two things that he said that stuck with me were get out the door and don't think when you're running. But if you're going to think, just think about, I'm going to take the next step to the best of my ability. Those two things.
Yep. I mean, I broke up so many ultra marathons by thinking, lying to myself, saying all you have to do is get 3 miles to the next aid station, where then you can take a break. And I had to lie and basically convince myself that was all I had left to do. Just get to there. And if you want to stop there or whatever, but forget about everything beyond that. And that was the hardest thing in the world, was just because I don't know, you do it 5 or 6 times in a row, and every time you realize you lied to yourself, but somehow that's how you get it done. So I guess Dean got to the point where it's even smaller than that, 1 step, not just 3 miles to the next one. But yeah, it's neat how you can learn to manipulate your own brain like that.
Matt, I do that on the Stairmaster for 25 minutes. Once you hit 12 and a half, I'm like, I'm halfway there. I just have to do this again. Or I've already done like 2 fifths. I can do another fifth. That's like 25 minutes on the Stairmaster, climbing 120 flights of stairs. But I do the same thing. I break it down into little things and that's maybe really practical for people who are not elite athletes. Get through the first 5 minutes, get through the first 10 minutes, and wow, that wasn't so bad. I can do that again. And I just want to add quickly, it's a totally different sport, but what Matt's talking about, and maybe Matt and I haven't even talked a whole lot about this, but that same kind of discipline resonates with people in things like bodybuilding, because you can't get bigger and stronger unless you're consistent. And then it teaches you, much like Matt said, it teaches you about not quitting. And that carries over into other areas of life. Do you have any idea how hard this was to write? I mean, this is not easy. This is very hard. We interviewed over 100 different people, between elite athletes and experts and doctors and nutritionists, and then all the people who endorsed it, and the 2.5 years it took. It would be so easy to quit and give up. And Matt and I both have, good jobs, and we work from home and flexible, and we've had some success in other areas. Forget it, right? But it taught us that kind of discipline to not give up, knowing what that reward might be, having one of the best-selling books in the world. And that's not just for us. That's not just like a pat on the back, ego. That's man, we have committed our lives to this movement to help animals, the environment, and people's personal health. And what better way to do it than having the #1 nutrition book in the world right now? It's like I talked about, connecting the dots. This was the mission. Before Matt and I even decided to work together, we had that conversation. We don't want to write another book, just another book. We've already written a bunch of books, 7 combined. Why write another book on the same subject? We wanted to write the best book, the quintessential resource. And I mean that. I'm not just saying this to piggyback on Matt's comment. I'm saying the sports discipline of not giving up and learning something about yourself that you never knew that you had in you can carry you through those difficult times in life, going through tough things with relationships, with moving, or with a new experience, or with creating something super meaningful, or something that's scary. It's hard to start a podcast. It's hard to write a book. It's hard to make a movie. It's hard to speak on stage in front of hundreds or even thousands of people. That's intimidating. But if you teach yourself, man, look what I did on the running course. Look what I did for 739 consecutive days. This habit, in that case, I'm referring to push-ups and crunches that I did, or what I did for a decade in bodybuilding. Yeah, okay, I got a little bigger, I got a little stronger, and my clothing fits differently, and I have the opportunity to do these flexing photos and stuff. But it also taught me up here and in here what I can really do in more meaningful areas of life, like outreach and education and activism, which we're doing through our work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's super powerful how the discipline that you hone with respect to the way you treat your own body can inform everything else you do in life. I think that's really powerful. I'm curious. I think a lot of people, when they think about going vegan or going plant-based, in their minds, it's an intimidating prospect because it's something that obviously requires discipline. And for the average person that doesn't have a history with it, the idea of completely changing their diet and going through this massive overhaul that could take them from now to the end of their life, that just seems like an impossible project. I'm curious, for you two who have been in this for a really long time, Do you ever have moments where it feels like you'd like to break the diet, or you'd like to go back and have something that you were eating prior to this switch? Or have you trained your brain to the point now where you can't imagine putting something in your body that's not plant-based?
Yeah. I mean, so I can go first, and I'm sure Robert will have a different perspective. Like mine has been, it doesn't feel like I'm on a diet in any way, like that I'm in any way restricted. What it feels like to me is like, if you start going to the gym, maybe that's the investigation. Like if you find a hobby that you really get into and you start putting more and more time in it, and it goes through a period where like that's all you want to do and all you want to think about because it is so rewarding and so fun, and you see the results of getting better at it, you're not at all thinking like, I have to keep doing this thing. Maybe if it's like a musical instrument or something, there's some bit of like, I'm going to get up and keep this up. But like you go through some periods where like it's all you want to think about. And once you go through that, for me, like it just becomes a hobby. So I think a lot of people like look at the time that I might spend on food preparation and buying the right food and the money spent on good food, and they think like that's crazy. I don't want to do all that. But I didn't necessarily want to do it when I started it. I wouldn't have wanted to do all that. That was never my plan. It just was so rewarding and it felt so good and it's so much fun. So like, you don't have to get there right away, but I think it's sort of a privilege to get to that point, to have something in your life that is that rewarding and fun and that you want to invest in that way. Same will go to like if you start lifting at the gym. I think a lot of people understand the resistance to that. They also understand how good it feels when it's working. And when you're being consistent and you're 6 months into a program and you haven't missed or you barely missed and you're seeing the results, like at that point, you have a ton of like knowledge about the different workouts and how much you can lift, and you know where you've been and how far you've come. And if you knew at the beginning that you'd have to understand all those things, learn all these things, make all like that seems like a daunting task to ever get there. But once you're there, it's fun. Like that's what you do, and so yeah. So I mean, no, I mean I never have any second thoughts about that. There are inconveniences. There's times like when I travel to other countries, and it's like, we kind of miss out on some part of the culture because we can't do the typical. We go to Spain and they're 20 years behind as far as like food, healthy food sort of movement. It's just not. It's very traditional, like lots and lots of meat still. And so like we'll order a drink at a bar and they'll bring out the tapas, which they like, it's a gift to you. And it's not a vegan thing at all. So we have to reject the gift they're giving. So like there are little things like that. Where it's like, that was sort of not that fun to have to do that. Especially being like the chill. I don't like, I'm not the one who would see that as an opportunity to spread my message and like, hey, you should try this. Like, I'm not going to do that. So, there are those things, but it's never, ever like, just wouldn't cross my mind to say, let's not be vegan anymore.
Yeah. And for me, there's no temptation. Partly I've been doing it for a quarter century. I mean, you do anything for a quarter century, you're kind of in that pattern now, you're in that habit. But even early on, and partly because, or not partly, but largely because I never, ever forgot why I became vegan in the first place. Now you can become vegan for lots of different reasons. And even statistically, it shows that, if you go for health reasons, you're more likely to stick with it for the long haul, or if you get into it gradually. I'm the kind of complete opposite. But yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm also not, super normal. I don't just do normal things. I like to take things a little bit, far in different directions and try to excel. And I just wanted to be anything but normal when I was a kid. And so for me, I got into this for animal rights. Like, I'm not tempted. People will say like, aren't you tempted when you walk by the meat section? No, I mean, I actually literally hold my breath as if I'm doing like a, experiment underwater or something. I hold my breath and I walk past it if I'm trying to get some Beyond Meat that's in that section or something like that. Or if I've got to go there to get some, chocolate almond milk that's in the dairy section next to the meat. No, I mean, I'm turned off by it, because, and I come from that background too, of like, I know people become vegan for different reasons. And a lot of people have even never even seen farm animals. In fact, I actually met an adult. I couldn't believe this. My mind was blown, and doesn't happen very often. I met an adult who had never seen a cow before, like a one that's still alive. And that was, we had them like from the moment I was born. They're just outside the house. Like that's what I'm used to seeing.
Yeah.
Or just with my travels anywhere in America, or around the world, I tend to see farm animals, but some people haven't, and so, and in some cases, their only connection with farm animals, animals that tend to be eaten by people, is maybe at a animal sanctuary or, off in the distance from the freeway on I-5 going up, LA to San Francisco or something.
Yeah.
But because I have that more intimate familiar relationship raising. I mean, bottle feeding baby calves before I get on the school bus, seeing baby chicks hatch and being there when they're born. I'm not tempted by those kinds of foods. And I've traveled around the world. I've given talks in China and Australia and Europe and all these faraway places. And like Matt, occasionally there are some inconveniences, but I'm never tempted. I'll just say, okay, I'm going to fast today, or I've got a backpack full of Lar bars everywhere I go. If I've got 17 hours to Sydney, which I think I'm going in a matter of months, back to Australia, I'll have that stuff packed. Or if I'm, away from home or for a long period of time or traveling, not just by air travel, but somewhere else, there could be some inconveniences. Like, in China, I didn't understand the language and had to have a translator and try to figure out what to do with food stuff. But, you make it work. And luckily for all of us, produce has always been there. Plant-based foods have always been there. You don't have to have a fancy burger or vegan pizza. Go get an apple, get an orange, get bananas, which is a great source of fuel. Get some berries, get some sweet potatoes. The day I landed in Bangkok, I went to a fresh market. Yeah, there are a lot of people selling meat on a stick on the street, but there's markets. Go get fresh produce and amazing fruit. And so sometimes we forget. We say, yeah, but vegan, what are you going to do when you go eating pizza and burgers and all that? Well, luckily we have those options now, but there's also a grocery store in anywhere America, even the Piggly Wiggly down in the South, that's going to have stuff for you. Even if you're down in, in the bayou in Louisiana or Alabama, it's available to anyone, anywhere in America and many parts around the world. So no temptation, because it's led by compassion for me. And I say that sincerely. That's just what drives me.
Amen.
I'm going to add one more thing really quick, just to make this a little bit more practical for someone who might be saying like, well, then this isn't for me because I know I would be tempted, right? Like, for me, certainly in the beginning, it was tempting. Like I said, years in, not at all. But in the beginning, I don't want to say like I was thinking that I would stop doing it. But if you had come to me like a week into this thing and said, right now, you should choose between, do you get to ever have buffalo wings, which was my favorite thing in the world? You get to ever have that again, or do you choose not to ever have that again? Of course, then I would have said, well, I'll choose to have it again because I was only a week into this. And so if you think in those terms, that's like, all or nothing from the beginning, I think for me, that's really hard. That's why I don't like to change overnight. Because if you tell yourself right away, I'm vegan and this is how I am from now on, a week later you get tempted by a cheeseburger because you smell it and your friends are eating it. And if the decision now is this ever again or vegan, it's really hard to pick the vegan one unless you have some deep commitment like Robert obviously does ethically, or some health scare that just forces you to do it. So for me, I like set up all these little challenges. And in the beginning, it was a 7-day challenge that I was doing. No, it was a 10-day challenge. And I said, I'm just going to do it for 10 days because that way, when 5 days in, you hit that point and you really want the cheeseburger or the buffalo wings, you can tell, just like the marathon thing, kind of, you can tell yourself, I don't have to go my whole life. I just need to make it 5 more days. And I can do that. I can manage that. It seems hard, but I can manage 5 more days. And then most likely by the time you hit that 5 more days, you'll be in a different state. You're not going to be in this turned on state where you just smelled wings. And then you can make a decision and say, yes, I'm going to do this for now 30 days or 2 weeks or whatever. And for me, it was a series of these like little, I can do this a little bit longer challenges, which they give you kind of a finish line. And I think that helps people feel like they can do stuff. It doesn't have to feel like your whole rest of your life is your decision right now, because that's really hard to make a good decision there.
Yeah, it's very practical.
I love the baby step approach there. And I mean, in terms of the, challenge, I think another challenge is, many people don't know what to buy at the grocery store. So one of the best parts about your book was the fact that you did set up meal plan templates. And then you also shared grocery lists, like not only what you're buying, but what some famous athletes are buying as well. And then you also included recipes. So I think the fact that this book had the science plus the how-to part of it is what makes it so impactful, especially for someone like me who feels like, for the most part, I'm plant-centric, but my weakness is the pantry and like my snacking. So the fact is that now I can think about snacking with like bell peppers, for example. And just that little insight in terms of what to buy at the grocery store, I think helps with the quote unquote, the challenge that people might have in their head around getting over this.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely by design to have both the practical stuff and the theoretical nutritional science stuff. But I guess one other aspect here that like, we didn't want to just say, this is Matt Frazier's approach to a vegan diet or Robert Cheeke's approach to being a plant-based bodybuilder. We had both done that plenty. We wanted this to be a huge survey of a ton of athletes. And when I say survey, I don't mean literally a survey. I mean, sort of surveyed the scene and presented 60 different approaches. Really, I mean, kind of went into this. There aren't 60 that are given in the book, but that was all part of the ingredients that made this book. And 25 of the athletes' day in the life stories made it in here. Their day in the life, not stories, the day in the life routines, exactly what they eat all day long. And then several of those day in the lives actually feature recipes from that exact athlete. So the recipes that you mentioned, those are all contributed by the athlete, or almost all of them by the athletes themselves. And what I like about that is like, then you can see different snack ideas or breakfast ideas. And it's not just one person's approach to that, because that one person might not ever snack on bell peppers. And so they wouldn't think to suggest that. But you get to see all these different ideas, and then you can say, hey, I'd like to try that thing, or I'd like to even try that sport or whatever. And I think that's what makes it so different from what has been done before. And so I think it's immensely practical.
And not only that, it's transparent. Like, we've been doing this for a long time. And I think Matt and I both maybe kind of suspected that at least at the elite level, at the world champions, Olympians, the best in the world, they're probably doing things roughly the same, same kind of foods, right? Same kind of eating patterns, same maybe meal timing. And what we found was that wasn't the case. We found that the common theme was plant-based food, the omission of animal protein. And like you said, I love those points you made at the beginning, the 64 times more antioxidants in plants than animals, and fiber that's only found in plants. Dietary cholesterol, one of the Achilles heels of the American diet, only found in animal protein. And then you saturated fat, calorie density, all these other things. So it was the common theme of plant-based foods and the omission of animal protein. But from there, it all goes out the window. Some people use supplements, some don't. And of course, there's some underlying themes of mostly whole foods, mostly, real whole intact foods rather than a lot of processed foods. I mean, and no one's really at the, Olympic or world-class level really fueling themselves with vegan pizza. They might have it on occasion, but that's not the foundation.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's what we want. We wanted to be totally transparent too. Like, what are people really doing? Because sometimes I think we have this idea. I know I have. I don't know about you, Matt, but I had this idea of perfectionism. As this, even when we were getting endorsed by some of these great luminaries, some of the greatest plant-based doctors, physicians, best-selling authors, I thought I need to be perfect like them. But then I spent time around them and realized even these amazing doctors who have, just been, chairs of committees and all this stuff and performed thousands of surgeries or the thousands of patients and written books that literally sold millions of copies. And they're having vegan pizza on a party deck on a vegan cruise. And I'm there with them. And so is Matt. We're like, oh, there's room outside of perfection. And that lowered my stress because you could probably tell from my personality. I'm like a, go-getter. I want to be as perfect as possible. And one of my good friends recently, who's also very successful, Chef AJ, she reminded me that, perfectionism isn't always the goal here. In fact, it's a great source of stress, including for me in my life. And so understanding that even the best in the world, and, Arnold talks about this, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he drinks beer and all this stuff, even at the height of his bodybuilding career. Yeah. Like, there's room for a little bit of fun or flexibility, as long as your core principles are nutrient-rich, plant-based whole foods. That from there, expand and live your life and be a great athlete and have fun.
Speaking of core and foundation, why don't we get into that a little bit? What should a plate look like? Just, generally speaking, in terms of the breakdown between the split between carbs, fat, and protein. And what are some of the biggest myths that I think that, or people have that you've encountered around eating fat or eating protein? What can you share about that?
For me, I think the biggest myth, honestly, is a very deeply held belief that our plates need to fit some sort of mold that says this much carbohydrate, this much fat, this much protein. There's this obsession with counting macros and hitting your macro numbers. And I definitely acknowledge that for certain sports that might matter. For bodybuilding, and maybe that this is the way to reduce fat on your body or build muscle, it's to hit this exact thing. And that's fine. But for most people, for general living, even someone who's trying to just be fit, I think the stress savings that you get and the enjoyment of eating that you get by literally throwing that, not literally throwing that out the window, I shouldn't say literally, by throwing that stuff out the window, completely forgetting that stuff. I think it's completely worth it. So to me, I would fill a plate with whole foods, whole plant foods, that's going to seem appetizing and fill you up. So that doesn't mean put a whole plate of kale, unless some days you want that. Some days a little kale with lemon juice and salt is the best thing in the world. But most people aren't going to do that as their plate because that's not going to be satiating. So, they'll also put some potatoes on there, or more often actually make a large one plate, one dish meal, like a big, whole grain pasta dish that has beans in it and maybe a pesto sauce and some green beans and potatoes. Like most of the things that I eat we don't have different dishes. There's not different parts of the plate. There's one thing. And so every bite's kind of the same bite, which is, I guess a downfall, but not really. But I think like a lot of people make I shouldn't say it's a mistake, but like they make it harder on themselves than it needs to be, because they come into a plant-based diet and they look at their plate before, and then they say, well, how do I basically do the same thing? How do I have protein in the middle of the plate representing half of the total quantity? And then how do I have a carbohydrate starchy dish over here and a vegetable over here so that I still hit these things? You don't need to do that. You just need to eat plant-based foods that seem delicious. Now, for me, finding recipes really helps, because if I didn't in the early days, I would have not known what to do, and I would have had a pile of chickpeas over here, and I would have had sweet potato cut up over here, and like to me that wouldn't be an interesting good dinner. So find things that put chickpeas and sweet potatoes together in a curry dish over brown rice with a recipe that's made to be that way, some coconut milk for the sauce, and like you have a delicious dish that most people don't eat that kind of dish in this country or this culture, but it's delicious and it opens up new horizons, and it is just, like to me that's how you do this. And then say, if someone asks you how much do you eat, look at what the actual content is of these things. Like what is the macro breakdown? And usually for most people who eat that way on a plant-based diet, it's going to be around 70% carbohydrate, 15% protein, 15% fat. For some people, it'll be even lower protein. You can go as low as 10 and be totally fine. And I mean totally fine, like even as an athlete. Some people will want a little bit lower carbohydrate, like 60-65%, and have some higher fat perhaps. Most people though that I talk to, even athletes, they don't get their protein over 15 and 20%. It's just that's creeping into high, for me, I think too high of protein. But like I said, I don't think about these numbers ever. Only if someone asks, or if I'm tracking food and I just figure it out. I just eat like I talked about. I find recipes that involve whole foods, and I make sure there's a variety of them. And to me, that's how you eat a plant-based diet.
And just adding one quick thing to that, and I will be quick, because I was up to like 2-3 in the morning documenting a whole week of meals that I tracked. It's one of these bonuses that Matt and I are offering when people order our new book and stuff. And it reminded me of the point that, like Matt's saying, you don't have to have these square meals on your plate, like a protein, carbohydrate, fat in these certain quantities at every single meal, because everything accumulates throughout the day, and not even just that 24-hour period, but it's not a one day thing, because we can all eat an awful diet in a day. Just, we're at a party or, whatever it is, there's a theme to it, or we're not feeling very well, or we just go crazy on something. We all have those days, and we all have those days that are really good. Like just like picture perfect out of a book, like out of a meal plan of the book. Like, wow, you hit every one of the daily dozen there, every one of the Andy score, the highest nutrient per calorie foods. Like, wow, you're like perfect. But we're not like that every day. And we're not like that for every meal. So every meal doesn't have to be perfect either. And I was reminded of that as I documented all my meals on handwritten on paper and typed it all up last night over the course of a couple hours. I'm like, oh yeah, even, I kind of fast in the morning, and like Matt does, and my first meal comes a little bit later at maybe 11 a.m. or noon. And then here come the calories. Then here comes the diversity. And then you start getting up to like 5 p.m. It's like, Robert, where's all the calories? But it's like, oh, because Robert trains, or, I train in the evening, and most of my calories are post-workout dinner. Post-workout and dinner is the same meal for me. So, it all adds up. You can't just look at like half of my day and say, man, how is that guy 220 pounds? He hasn't eaten much but blueberries and bananas and, oats and all this stuff. Because it's not just based on an individual meal or even an individual day. It's consistently taking in adequate calories based on your true calorie needs. And then you can determine whether you're going to build muscle or burn fat or just stay the same. And you have some sort of control over that. And neither one of us, even completely different sports, different backgrounds, neither one of us are big on counting, macronutrients or even counting calories. We do it for a short period of time to understand where we are and maybe why we're not building muscle or burning fat, or why we're not progressing, or what are our habits that we're not aware of. And it's eye-opening. But then from there, you just create habits, create patterns, and then everything just becomes second nature after that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people that are considering going plant-based will think that it will require a lot of expensive supplements to round out their diet. You touch on this in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about your guys' thoughts on the necessity or non-necessity of supplements?
Yes, I think that's really a big misconception. I will come right out and acknowledge that there's one nutrient you absolutely need on a plant-based diet to supplement with, and that is vitamin B12. It's produced in the soil or by bacteria. We just don't eat dirty foods anymore. We're so hyper, sanitized now in our food system, which in many ways is good, but it also adds that need in. If you're not going to be, because animals will get that, by them eating food that's not quite so sanitized. And then you'll get it from them. But even people who are omnivores often are deficient in B12. So they should probably be, some of them should be supplementing. So absolutely, there is one that you should be taking, and it's that. And that's not quite true of an omnivorous diet. There's no nutrient that we can point to and say, you're going to run into real problems not right away, but within a few years if you don't have this. But by and large, I take way fewer supplements on a plant-based diet than I used to with an omnivorous diet. And I think most people do too. A lot of people who are health conscious eating an omnivorous diet take a multivitamin, and it's to cover your bases because we don't all eat as much vegetables as we should. And so we want to make sure we're getting, the vitamin C, the A, E, right? Just all these different things, including minerals. Most vegans, it's like I actually invented a supplement company for this reason. We made a supplement that only has B12 and a couple other things in it because we didn't want to take a multivitamin because we're already getting all that stuff from our food. Because we eat these rich, variety of fresh whole fruits and vegetables and beans and seeds and nuts and grains. And so we just get this abundance of those things. So I don't want to take a whole bunch of extra things, even if my body supposedly just flushes them out when they're extra, which is true of some vitamins, but not all. I just don't want to take, our bodies is very delicate, the complex system. Like why put 2000% of your vitamin C intake in every day? It's just to me what can that disrupt? Even if in theory it's going to be excreted, which certainly most of it will. Why introduce that extra stuff into the system? So to me, plant-based diets are so rich in vitamins that they actually need to supplement with fewer things than an omnivorous diet probably does. Now, certainly there are omnivores who do a really good job planning and making sure they get a lot of vegetables and fruits and things like that, and that's an exception. They don't need a multivitamin. So I'm not trying to say that all omnivorous diets are deficient in vitamins. But I think the way most people eat an American diet, they have a much greater need for supplementation than someone eating a whole food plant-based diet does. So if you want specifics, to me, vitamin B12, D3, and DHA and EPA, which are two fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, those are the things that most vegans should probably supplement with. It's just a good practice. But B12 is the one that you absolutely need. And then, there are others you can argue about, and we make a product that has a couple more minerals in there, but they're not universally agreed upon at all that you need those.
And one of the points we make in the book too is that it's not vegans who are funding a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry. It's, people think, oh man, if you're vegan, you gotta have this very carefully planned, super supplemented diet. It's like, no. Like Matt said, you're missing just a few things, if at all, B12 being the main one there. But, it's people loading up on multivitamins and then all these sports things like, glutamine and creatine and branched chain amino acids.
Protein. I didn't even mention protein.
Protein powders.
My mind's that, right? I don't even think about protein, but that's a supplement that comes to mind, obviously. So Robert, you can talk about that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whey and casein protein are the best selling proteins in the world. And it's not even, many times it's not even athletes or even active people who are drinking those, or people sitting on the couch saying, I've been marketed protein. That I need to have it. I need to have this protein drink because I'm sitting here using the remote. Like, this is work, and oftentimes we're marketed like, an energy bar in protein bars clothing, it's protein bar, 12 grams, but it has the exact, we know there's exact amount of calories per gram, and protein and carbohydrates, but it's got 12 grams of protein, but like 25 grams of carbohydrate. That is a carbohydrate bar, not a protein bar, my friend. We're also buying a bunch of fat bars, but because, fat has way more calorie density than carbohydrates and protein. And so you look at do the math and do the grams there, and you're like, oh yeah, this is not a protein bar, it's a fat bar. And we've been convinced to buy protein water and protein popcorn. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of the book is the history of our obsession with protein. And so, we don't need to go into all of it here.
Going back to 1930s.
Exactly. People post-World War, and the rise of television and the rise of fast food restaurants and family diners and people making masculine, this association with masculinity, food at home, oftentimes back then, women making food for their families and masculine men who are coming back from war or whatever, and thinking and believing that meat and milk do a body good. And then TV dinners and microwaves played a role in that. And then Joe Weider and Arnold Schwarzenegger played a role in the supplement industry. And then the muscle magazines, which are only in existence because they're funded by the supplement brands that advertise in there. And then they sponsor the big, huge, famous bodybuilders who represent those brands, then market to young, impressionable people like me who want to start, getting into supplements. Mm-hmm. That's a fun thing to write about, because you're like, you walk away with it like, oh man, I've been tricked. Mm-hmm. I've been tricked into thinking I need all this protein when really the science suggests that I don't. And I can get all the protein that I need from plants. And so that was a fun topic to write about as well. But just as a reminder that it's not vegans buying up all the billions of dollars of supplements. It's those who are not consuming as many vitamins or minerals as they probably should, and those who are loading up on supplements that they really don't need, like all that extra protein.
Yeah, the supplement industry in 2019, again, information from your book, was about $130 billion. And the projection is that by the end of 2025, you're looking at north of $250 billion. And so there's a lot of money that's talking there. And I would also say that it's maybe money that's talking as to why it's so hard for people to just be able to easily access more whole foods. I think, again, Matt, you've talked about, like, you put your mind to it, you can do it. But if it was just made easier for people, then that would be a lot better. But there's just too much money behind the scenes, I think. A couple hurdles in the way, and there's a lot more interest for like meat to sell and protein to sell. And so you can kind of see the system behind the scenes that's playing out as well.
Sure. There's government subsidies, which we talk about. I think we talked about that in the book. I certainly did on this big 35-page paper that I wrote about the true cost of food, about what makes, animal protein so affordable, 99-cent burgers or, $2 burgers or $1 chicken nuggets. I mean, there's massive government subsidies and all kinds of things involved in that production that keeps costs low and keeps people unhealthy, unfortunately, which then increase medical costs and dealing with the biggest causes of death and disease in our country, heart disease and cancer and diabetes and hypertension, and these things that are diet and lifestyle related that can be prevented. And we're filling up hospital beds, we're filling up prescriptions and pills and all of these kinds of things with massive expenses, which makes it really not all that affordable after all. Your $1 chicken nuggets are really, really expensive later down the road. And a plant-based diet is one of the best things you can do for healthcare and prevention. We didn't even talk about that. We don't have time to talk about it today, but that's another benefit of a plant-based diet, is not just for athletics and reducing inflammation and improving energy and helping with digestion and helping managing nutrient to calorie ratio and body weight and all those things. It is so good with longevity and preventing and in some cases reversing our common degenerative diseases. So it's just a win-win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. And I know we have just about 2 or 3 minutes here before you have to run off to your next interview. So before I ask you one final question that we've been asking all our guests, I will actually run really quickly through a list of 50 athletes that you may or may not have heard of who are plant-based athletes. And obviously 50 because it's our 50th episode. But Mike Tyson, Scott Jurek, who, quick fact, he holds the U.S. record for most miles run in a road race over 24 hours. He ran 165.7 miles. That's 6.5 marathons in one day. Alex Morgan, Novak Djokovic, the Williams sisters, Kyrie Irving, Damian Lillard, Chris Paul, JaVale McGee, my boy JaVale,
yep.
DeAndre Jordan, Wilson Chandler, Diana Taurasi, Liz Cambage, Rebecca Brunson, Derek Morgan, Cam Newton, Nick Diaz, Timothy Bradley, James Wilkes, Matt Danzig, Heather Mitz, Rebecca Soni, Megan Duhamel, Dottie Bosch, Farhat Kohli, who's a cricket superstar, Carl Lewis, Lewis Hamilton, Steph Davis, Kaepernick, Elijah Hall, Morgan Mitchell, Patrick Baboumian. I might have completely... He's arguably the world's strongest man. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rich Roll, which you talked about briefly at the beginning, Hannah Teeter, Tia Blanco, Fiona Oakes, Michaela Copenhaver, Kendrick Ferris, Molly Cameron, Seba Johnson, Darcy Gachter, who was the first and only woman to kayak the Amazon River, which is the longest river in the world. That's a total of 4,200 miles from source to sea. No big deal. Pat Neshek, who's a football player. Christine Vardaros. Dana Glowacka, who holds the women's world record for the longest plank held. She did it for 4 hours, 19 minutes, and 55 seconds.
I remember seeing that.
Right. Rocky Ludiker, who's a 63-year-old woman who has 14 powerlifting records. And then,
I've watched her compete.
There you go. And then, of course, rounding out the list, Robert Cheeke and Matt Frazier.
There you go. That's not even list. That's not from where'd you? I mean, that was from somewhere else, right? Not our book. But
yeah, not from our book.
But a bunch of those are in the book.
Yeah, a bunch of them are in the book, and then a bunch of other ones are not on the book. A bunch of there's a bunch more that are in the book that were not mentioned there, and that's what people got to check out and get inspired by their stories, including Corinne Sutton, who we just interviewed just a little bit ago. Yep. So yeah, you guys, we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much for having us.
So one more question, Robert. We have to final question.
One last question.
Oh,
yeah. If you could be any animal other than yourself for one day, what would you be and why?
I'm sure if I thought about it more, I'd come up with something different. I think a cheetah would be really fun to be that, just to be the fastest animal on the planet. I think that would be really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Not to catch the antelope or whatever, but just to be that fast would be awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah. How about you, Robert?
Man, I guess my bodybuilding roots would want me to be a rhino. I think that would just be awesome. Like, don't mess with me, dog, man. I'm eating my kale, I'm eating my grass, and I'm going to whoop your... No, just kidding.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you have to run, and we appreciate your presence.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.